Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Bites. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons.
Welcome back for another podcast. Today I'm going to talk to you about why am I on this intuitive journey? And up until an hour ago, I was struggling with what I was going to talk about today. And I just sitting there going over notes, had all sorts of good topics, things I wanted to talk about, and it just wasn't coming together. And so I've got one of those little jumping trampolines, a little rebounder, and so I jumped on that for a couple of minutes. And while I was jumping on that, just energizing my body, just came to me. I just need to talk about why am I on this intuitive journey? And if you go back through all my podcasts, you'll hear bits of it everywhere. And probably in the particularly the earlier ones, this is episode number 96. If you go into some of the early ones, I definitely talk about it there. But I just thought I'd go over it again for those of you who have not heard on why I've decided that it's very important for men on this planet to know why it's important to develop their intuition, and then of course how to do it. And for me, I'm going to say roughly 35 years ago, I heard a saying, and that was, most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. And that resonated to my core back then, because I looked at a couple of men in my life who I suddenly realized that that's what their life was, quiet desperation. One of those men was extremely close to me. It was my father. And Dad passed away probably about a year and a half ago. And since he's passed, our relationship's changed. It's different now. I could say it's better. Some people would say it's better. But after he went, things were revealed to me on why he was the way he was. Anyway, the reason I decided that this was a great thing to do, help men develop their intuition, is my dad would come home from work. He was always a blue-collar, very hard worker. When he was at work, he would work extremely hard. When he was at home, around the yard, things like that, there was never a thing out of place. My dad always kept the yard neat as a pin. He was a very hard worker. But when he'd come home from work on a Friday night or on a Saturday or a Sunday, he'd been to the local pub and he'd been drinking. We never quite knew how Dad was going to come home. When I was very little, 4 or 5, I really looked forward to Dad coming home on Friday night because he'd be drunk and he would either bring a bottle of soda or soft drink and some ice creams home for us kids, or he would forget, and because I was the baby, he'd put me in the car and drive me half a mile, a kilometre or so, down to the local corner store, and I got to pick ice creams and drinks for all us kids. But sometimes my little 4'10" mama, with her Italian ancestry, would not be too happy about Dad coming home in that state, and she would let him know. And the tension would rise. Nothing physical ever took place in our home, but it was verbal and extremely emotional. And I didn't like it. In my teenage years, I started grinding my teeth in my sleep. I would wake up with a sore jaw from grinding my teeth, being so on edge of how Dad was going to come home. And that just made me decide that I didn't want men living lives like that. I didn't want little boys, teenage boys growing up like that. I want the children in this world to look forward to their fathers coming home. Now, I'm being sexist, I'm only talking about men. There is plenty of people out there talking and helping women. I don't see that as my role, and everything that they are doing is awesome for the women. I just see my role is to help men make better decisions in life. Because if I can help men make one better decision every day of their life by tapping into their intuition, whether they realize they're tapping into it or not, they don't have to know they're tapping into their intuition. But if they can make one better decision a day, every child in our world will be happier that their father's walking through the door after coming in from working out in the yard, coming in from working a job, returning home from wherever they have been. Because those fathers are going to kick the cat one less time often. They're going to come home a little bit more satisfied with their life, with the decisions they make. Their partner in life is going to be that little bit more proud of them, that little bit more happy with them. And that is going to flow down to the children. And the children are the next generation. They are the future of this world. And I want those little boys and girls to be happy that their father is walking through the door, their father is standing an inch or two taller, because today he made a better decision than he would have normally. And it's affected his self-confidence. It affects then the children's self-confidence. It affects that man's partner's self-confidence, because everybody feels just a little bit better. That will then go exponentially out through the world, affecting the lives of everyone around. So I'm talking about my intuitive journey, and that's my why. That's why I've just shared with you my why on why I'm doing this. And how did it all start to come online? Probably back about 2009, 2010, I got introduced to a book about changing our eating habits. And I read the book and I thought, this sounds like a good idea. I'm going to change my eating habits in line with this book. And I did. I followed it 100%. I got crazy results. Over the next few months, I not only was physically better, and that's why I changed what I was eating to physically be healthier. I'd hit the age of 47 at that point. And I just had this epiphany that I needed to keep my physical body in better condition. But as a side benefit of that, my clarity of mind came on. And it just, as the months went on and I was eating cleaner, I was eating far, far, far less processed food and far more unprocessed food, fruit and vegetables, things like that. And they went hand in hand. And I put it down to changing what I was eating. It may not have been, but I believe it was, if it wasn't, it was very coincidental. And if it wasn't what gave me clarity of mind, I don't know what did. But as that clarity of mind came on, I started looking, searching, and seeing the world in a different way, in a better way. And I knew there was more, and I was hungry for it. I got introduced to a book called Clear Heart, Clear Home by a lady called Jean Hayner. She's in California. And shortly after reading that book, I looked up her website and saw that she had a 5-day training workshop on learning to clear energy in people and in spaces. And I was fascinated by it. So I hopped on a plane, flew to California, and did the 5-day training, and it was very, very life-changing for me. There was about 50 of us in the training, 5 men, 45 women, being taught by a woman. And something that Jean also taught us there in that training, as well as clearing energy, she taught us that we would most likely receive intuitive impressions as we were clearing the energy of a person or of a space inside a building, in someone's home or a business. And that was not unusual, and we could use our discernment, whether we shared that or not, with the person whose energy was being cleared. That did start to happen for me, but nowhere near as much as it seemed for me anyway, as the other ladies who were learning. it seemed to be happening then for a lot more. And I just thought, well, it's a ladies' thing, ladies' intuition, that's just how it is. Us men just, there's certain things we don't do. We don't give birth to babies, we don't feed babies, so therefore there's different things that men and women do, and intuition mustn't be one of those things. And so I talked to Jean, the instructor, who wrote the book, and she said, oh, no, Doug, intuition's the same for everyone. Yes, women do get it in a little bit more, and part of that, science of that is one way women do get intuition that men can't is when they are pregnant. They've proved scientifically that the woman's brain, the mother's brain, will start to rewire in alignment with the baby's brain so that they're both on the same frequency. And so the mother can keep the baby alive. She can understand intuitively before it's too late. She is ahead of the game all of the time because she's intuitively picking up. There's many, many, many different ways we receive intuition, and that's just one way that a mother does receive it. So I started to think, well, men must be able to be intuitive as well. And so I went on this journey of trying to learn and interpret it. And then back in 2020, 2021, 2022, the world changed. We had some unusual things happen, and things that none of us could have predicted would have gone on. We were told lots of different things about lots of different things, and we're still being told lots of different things. And I started to realize through my intuition that not everything that was on social media, not everything that was on the news, not everything that our government leaders or medical leaders were telling us was 100% true. And how did I know that? I was starting to sense it inside me. Now, I'm not suggesting for a second that anyone was telling lies or deliberately telling mistruths. And I didn't really get hung up on that, but I just started to realize that part of what we were being told was true. And both sides. There was a lot of different arguments, a lot of polarity, a lot of people at extreme ends of arguments. And I realized that both arguments, there were elements of truth and elements that weren't true, both sides. And it was like, this is a minefield. Who do we believe here? What's going on with all of this massive overload of information we're receiving? There was another thing that hadn't happened before. We hadn't been overwhelmed like we were during those years with information. And so I started to realize how important it is in these times we live in for us to go within ourselves and determine for ourselves how we should act, what we should do, what we should eat, drink, breathe, where we should go, how we should conduct ourselves when we're in various places. But we need to go within ourselves and tap into this inner information. We could take on board all of these things we were being told, being overloaded with information, and we could discern what of that information was important to us, important to others, and what was far less important. So that's a real reason why I think it's very important for us to tap into our intuition, to know that this is something we need to tap into, but we also need to know how to do that. And that's not part of the podcast today, how. I'm just sharing with you why. I was around that time when, particularly around 2020, I was struggling with really interpreting my intuition. It was there, it was coming through. I was having inner knowings, I was having physical feelings in my body, I was having all sorts of things happen. but I couldn't necessarily understand or interpret what the information was that was coming through. It was, to me, it was a foreign language and I couldn't understand it. Whereas 3 times I went to the United States and learnt different types of energy clearing, and at each of those classes, most of the ladies seemed to understand the information that was coming through for them. And, you know, and sure, we were getting it a lot more. We were deliberately going out, trying to tap into it, and most people don't do that. So hence it was coming online more and more. And so I got frustrated, and so I was driving in my car one day after that on my own, and I was very frustrated, and I cried out to the universe, not in an angry way, but very emotionally. And I said, send me someone to help me understand the language of my intuition, because I just don't get it and I need help. About 2 days later, within 2 days, might have been 1 day, I was on YouTube, and a lady that I follow, she posts stuff maybe twice a year. She just happened to put on a dozen videos all in 1 day. And I thought, well, I can't watch all of these. This is just too much information at once. So I watched 1 or 2. And on one of them, she interviewed a lady. And I'm not even really sure what they talked about. But I found the lady she was interviewing extremely interesting to listen to. So when it was over, I had a look through the show notes on YouTube there, and I found the lady's website. I went on it. Turns out this lady has an intuitive life coaching academy where she teaches students how to develop their intuition and how to become a life coach. I thought, that's very interesting. The whole coaching thing hadn't really occurred to me too much. I had had little thoughts about that in the previous years, but not a lot. But I thought, this is very interesting. So I rang them, talked to them. Next thing, I signed up, and I was on a 1-year journey with a group of about 25, 30 people, all women, online with live classes on Zoom, discussing intuition, coaching, things like that. So that really did help me a lot. I was able to now converse with other people regularly, like several times a week, live, face-to-face on camera, about intuition, to listen to conversations, listen to teachings, and ask questions, share information, and that really, really did help me a lot. So and I started to realize, like, why aren't there more men in this class? And I think like a couple of weeks after I graduated and wasn't part of the classes anymore, they had another guy enroll. And then I know there's at least another one, maybe another 2 since then, because that's been several years now. I mean, I really wish that those guys were there at the time, because I'd have loved to converse with them a lot more. But this is my why. This is why I'm on this intuitive journey, because I think a lot of men are like me. They just, if you start to bring up the intuition thing, they just think, that's for women. That's just what women do. But I'm telling you, men, it's not. It's for all of us. And if you've had any frustrations over the last 3 years with the information, with struggling to know what information is valid for you, for your life, for your family, for your work, for whatever it is, and you want to know, how can I know? Like, how can I get past this overwhelm of information that is all saying different things? We need to go within. Now, how we do that, that's another podcast. But if I can at least sow the seed in your minds of why you should develop your intuition, what's the advantage to you, why and how will it make your life easier? And I just know that, and particularly men, if you've got a partner, a life partner, or you've got children, just think about their lives. Think about the times that you've acted in a way that's frightened them, made them fearful, anything like that. And I hope, and if you answer and say to yourself, I've never done that to my partner or children, God bless you. I take my hat off to you if you have never done that. And it would be awesome. To you men who've ever frightened your children or partner, just think about the future. Wouldn't it be better to not ever do that, so that your partner and children are happy and smiling when they hear you drive in the driveway and open that door and come in every time, because today they know you've made wise decisions. You've made decisions that affect their lives for the better and your life for the better. And with that, we're all smiling, we're happier, we're getting on with our neighbours better. We can sit back and think about, all right, instead of a knee-jerk reaction, we can maybe take a breath and start to go within and listen to ourselves. And it can be so simple. I can tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I had a niggling cough and I had to do a podcast interview on Zoom with a gentleman. And before, an hour or two before the interview, I'm thinking, am I just going to be wrong here doing this, potentially coughing and things like that during the interview? What will I do? What decision will I make? So I just sat there in the seat where I was going to do the podcast. I was totally alone, and I just gently closed my eyes a little bit and I just asked the question inside myself, how will I feel if I don't do this podcast, if I delay it, if I send a message through to this gentleman and delay the podcast? How will I feel? And inside me I had a feeling, and it wasn't a bad feeling, but I had a feeling. And then I said, okay, now if I don't contact him and I just go ahead in 2 hours' time at the scheduled time and we run with this podcast, how am I going to feel? And I felt better than I did with the first question. So I went with that. Now, ran with that podcast. When that podcast was over, in the following hours, day or two, the gentleman that I interviewed sent me a message and he said, that particular thing I spoke about that happened to me at a certain age, that was the first time I've ever publicly said that. Now, I didn't drag those words out of that man. He voluntarily came out with that information. He'd shared it with some people, but never publicly. He then shared that podcast on his social media, and after he did, he messaged me and he said, I've just shared it on Facebook. He said, that's the bravest thing I've ever done in my life. Now, so to me, that was serious confirmation that yes, we needed to go ahead with the podcast, but had we not done it, that same information may have come out later when we did the interview a week or two later or something like that. But I found it wonderful that I was able to tap in to my inner feeling in my inner gut of a simple thing like that. Will I or won't I? There's advantages and disadvantages both ways. I could have put a strong argument for either case, to delay it and do it later, or to carry on. But I allowed my intuition to guide me. And it was definitely not forcing my hand either way, but it just gave me that little bit better feeling with going ahead. So I did. And that lifted me. It made me feel better at the time that I got that impression. But like I say, the following day or so, when he messaged me with those messages, how profound him speaking on the podcast was for his personal growth and for what he could bring to the world to help other men. So it's a powerful thing. It's subtle. It sits in the background. It doesn't overpower you or try and control you in any way. but it is a sixth sense. It's a superpower. And I strongly recommend you tap into it and run with it and use it to guide your life. And like I said, in other episodes, there's information on how to do that. In future podcasts, I'll be covering how to. Today has been about why I'm on this intuitive journey, and hoping you to think, I'm sowing the seed within you of potentially why you should live a life where you are more directed intentionally by your intuition. Thanks for listening in. Love you all. I really appreciate you listening in. If you're on YouTube, click subscribe, or on any of the other podcast platforms, click a like. It helps other people see it. And before I do this podcast, I sit here and I speak the words out that the men who need to hear this will hear this. And I believe you're one of them. Thank you. Till next week. Enjoy your week. Bye-bye.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.